guy called Marvin Minsky. Now, in the 60s, so that was the quote. So that's PDB-10. In the 60s, there was this idea of using a kind of brain cell in a computer, which today we call neural networks, which they called the perceptron, which was a way of building a form of intelligence inside the computer. And what happened was that the mathematicians, one of the colleagues of, which was Marvin Minsky, that co-founded the Artificial Intelligence Lab, actually wrote a book. And in this book, he used mathematics to prove why the biologist approach to intelligence and to computing was wrong. And that book has been cited as why the artificial intelligence winter in the 70s and early 80s, why research into artificial intelligence just kind of stopped. The actual field itself went through a huge amount of hype where they were promising more and more bigger things to their funders, and because they weren't able to deliver on the things that they promised, the next year they would promise even bigger things. And they just weren't able to deliver the promises that they were delivering. And this book by Marvin Minsky just dealt a blow to artificial intelligence. And meanwhile, in the 80s, the field of computing had advanced well beyond its initial stage. The ideas of time-sharing systems, of internet and so on, and the personal computer, which was developed by these idealistic hackers. And what happened now was the industry saw an opportunity. A huge amount of capital started to flow into this previously marginalized computer. And a lot of these hackers started to throw themselves at these large companies. And in the process of commercialization, which was something very important because it was what allowed this product of computers to be made into a tool that we can use today, like mobile phones and laptops and so on. But in that process, something that had been the beating heart of this movement was being lost. Previously, people used to share the code between each other. People used to have this vision or sense of destination and ambition. They were not just specialists in technology. They were philosophers. They were people who knew about history. They had a sense of politics. And they were actively trying to think, how do we use technology to better improve the world around us, to better improve humanity? But that culture began to change. Now it became solely about how do we make profit. Companies started to silo off their code. They started to say, this is our technology. This is proprietary technology. And a lot of the hackers just went along with it. But there was a few hackers who didn't. And in particular, there was one guy called Richard Stallman who said, no, this is wrong. That technology is something that is for all of humanity. It is not just to enrich a small elite or a few private companies. And he actually proposed, he said to the hacker community, it doesn't have to be this way. We can build our own operating system. And he released a manifesto in 1985 called the GNU Manifesto. And in that manifesto, he laid out a plan or a vision for a computer operating system. He actually said, these are the tools that we need to make. This is the progress we're making. This is how this thing is going to be organized. And a lot of people thought that he was simply crazy, that it was just impossible for a group of hackers by themselves, without any funding, to develop their own operating system. But he went and he did it, and he was successful. In the early 90s, that led to the development of Linux. Meanwhile, in 1991, Philip Zimmermann, because encryption software was classified as a munitions, released the world's first freely available encryption software for the masses to use. At the time, encryption technology was only in the hands of military and private corporations. It was classified by the US government as an export. So the US government arrested him, and he was facing a court case where he could go to prison for 10 years. And the way that Philip Zimmermann managed to get around that case is that he printed the source code for this software in a book that he sold internationally. Anybody could buy this book, and they could scan the pages of this book with the source code, and they could convert it to text using an OCR scanner, and they could compile it to the program. Through this process, Philip Zimmermann actually used the First Amendment as a way of protecting programmers. That was when code became speech. That was when programmers realized that we can write code And our code is a form of speech. There is nothing that the authorities or the states can use to stop us. And that was in 1991 when Philip Zimmermann did that really important piece of action. In 1992, we saw the Crypto-Anarchist Manifesto, which actually said that with this new power of cryptography, we can overthrow the states, we can overthrow the governments, we have a power now to challenge the existing power of state. And in 1993, we saw the Cypherpunks Manifesto, which said that now with this new power of technology, we had the ability to anonymize our communications, that now the police and the state could no longer intervene in the private affairs of citizens. In 1996, saw the publication of John Perry Barlow's A Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. In that declaration, he made a departure from the earlier ideals of the hackers, where we were saying that we were going to use this power of technology to shape the world around us. And he said that cyberspace is a new world, and that we are going to withdraw away into cyberspace, and that this was a world where everybody was equal, where power no longer had a role to play, and we exist in a new world outside of the confines of power. Meanwhile, Richard Stallman's free software movement was in full swing. It developed Linux. Linux was a far superior operating system to the competition. Linux was making really powerful inroads into the supercomputer and the server market. And the entire community was developing really great software. It was very active. Every town and city had a Linux user group. And that grew, but what Richard Stallman did is he took a hands-off approach to the movement. Sorry, do I have 5 minutes more? All right, yeah. And instead of being more active in playing a role in shaping how this movement would result, he took a hands-off approach, and a new group of guys came along, and they said, we're going to turn this free software into a business. And one of these guys was Eric Raymond, who released the book, The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And in that book, he said that developing this software was no longer about ideals. It was no longer about freedom, and it was simply a matter of cost and convenience for the individual. And this method of developing software was far superior to the older method of developing software, and that it would win in a marketplace spontaneously. In 1999, we saw the release of Napster. Napster was a file-sharing site for people to share music, and it was a decentralized file-sharing site, but they had centralized trackers. And they got into a legal battle with the music industry, and they lost that battle, and they got shut down eventually. With the shutdown of Napster led to the development of Friendster. Friendster developed into MySpace. MySpace developed into Facebook. And there was another guy that came along called Bram Cohen, and he actually came out. He was a guy that was really into maths puzzles, into solving problems. And he came up with the idea that we could actually decentralize every aspect of this file-sharing technology. And we could use that to make the effects of litigation from copyright industry completely powerless. And that was when he released BitTorrent. And BitTorrent actually set off a whole avalanche of political movements in the